Well, joining me now is former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, thanks so much for coming on the program. Welcome to the U.S. Report, and a very Merry Christmas to you. I've got to start out, though, this week talking about a little bit of grim news. Of course, I just spoke in my editorial at length about the difference in the approaches between Donald Trump and our own Prime Minister here, Anthony Albanese, on the issue of Israel and anti-Semitism and so on. We've just had this horrific shooting in Bondi this past week, but also a couple of very disturbing anti-Semitic attacks in New York and California, where somebody was stabbed in New York. A house with Hanukkah decorations was shot up in Los Angeles. I'd love to ask you about this. I wish I didn't have to, but with this rise in anti-Semitism, can you talk about the difference between how Trump approaches these things and maybe what you know about how we do things in Australia, and whether or not that Trump approach is a stronger, better way to deal with things, especially to make sure that the Jews of America don't feel like they're being left out on their own, as so many of them feel right now in Australia?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, James, and here's how I'd approach the answer. The one thing about Donald Trump is he's not afraid to just talk about stuff. He's not going to hide behind issues. He's not going to hide behind political correctness. If he believes that there's an anti-Semitism problem in the United States, he's going to talk about it. He's going to say that and we're going to have to fix it. It's in stark contrast to what we're seeing out of the Albanese government since the shooting on Bondi Beach, where, effectively what we're hearing over here, at least, is that the Australian government is taking the position that the gun control laws are really the problem, and that's really not an anti-Semitism thing. So it's just that's one of the big differences here. Say what you want to about Donald Trump, and I've heard all the criticisms, but he's not afraid to sort of be black and white when issues are black and white. Anti-Semitism is real, and it's wrong. It'd be nice if more leaders around the world would be as definitive and speak with such moral clarity.
Absolutely right, Mick. It's very correct, too. It's the gun control. That's what they're trying to do, fake it all out, make that the big #1 issue. But moving back to more sort of just American politics, too, we've just finishing up a year of the Trump 2.0 presidency. Now, I spoke at length about this before. I would love, though, and also the big speech he gave, just, stemwinder at the end of the year here, but I'd love you to give it to us straight as somebody who used to work for Trump. How do you think Donald Trump has done this past year? Better than you expected? Worse? And what do you reckon some of the challenges are coming up for him in 2026?
Yeah, I think it's been a real good year. I don't think it's been as good a year as they think it has been. Trump got asked the other day how the economy is doing, and he said it was A plus 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 plus. I counted, it was 5 pluses. That's just Donald Trump being Donald Trump, but it's not accurate. They've had a good year. The economy is in decent shape, but there are still issues to deal with. The affordability crisis is real. Inflation, while it's down again today, is still well above the 2% target. So things are trending in the right direction. But Trump is, the Trump team is running around like they've already won the game. And that's a real dangerous sort of attitude to have going into 2026, because they have some real severe headwinds just institutionally going into the midterms next November. Keep in mind that usually the party in power in the White House loses seats in the first by-election. So that's what they're facing, and they're going to have to do better in 2026, or else they do stand the chance of significant losses next November.
Yeah, and that means they've really only got 9 or 10 months to get that agenda out there and bedded down next year. But Mick, also, another topic this week, and I was so glad you were coming on this week, because you're a former chief of staff, and the current chief of staff to Donald Trump, Susie Wiles, she's just done this wild interview with Vanity Fair. Now, you were the chief of staff at the end of the 45 presidency. What did you make of this interview where Wiles said Trump had the personality of an alcoholic, called J.D. Vance a conspiracy theorist, talked about all sorts of other issues like deportation? Did she think she was going to get a fair hearing, or was there some 4D chess involved in her doing this series of interviews?
I still think we're going to hear a lot about this story before it's over, and it's gotten a lot of international attention. You can imagine people calling me in the last couple of days wanting to talk about it. Here's a couple of different insights on it. Number one, it's not really making news to say that Donald Trump has an alcoholic personality. He uses that same language about himself, just in private, not in public. J.D. Vance will laugh and call himself a conspiracy theorist. So when Susie said those things, to the reporter, it's highly likely that he simply took them out of context. I could say 5 or 6 really nice things about you, and at the end and go, yeah, but sometimes he's hard to deal with. And if that's the only thing they print, it makes it look like it's much worse than it is. All of that being said, I still don't understand why the interview took place at all.
That's the big question.
Explains it. Yeah, arrogance would explain it, but she's not an arrogant person. Naivete would explain it, but she's not a naive person. The only thing that I can come back with, James, is that I think the president probably wanted her to do it. Chris Whipple, the reporter, is famous for writing books about chiefs of staff, and Susie Wiles is the first female chief of staff. And my guess is Trump probably encouraged her to talk about this as a way to sort of lay the foundation for her historic role in the federal government. I'm not sure it was a great idea, but it's certainly not the end of the world. It's not going to cost her job. The media is blowing it way out of proportion. My guess is it'll be gone by the time this time next week.
I cannot believe you, Mick, so cynical, saying that the media is blowing something out of proportion about the Trump White House. Perish the thought and rue the day. Hey, we keep talking every week when we get together about Venezuela. And this week there was a further escalation here, a blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers entering and exiting Venezuela. This follows, of course, the seizure of that oil tanker, a bunch of hits on those drug boats. When is this going to come to some sort of head one way or the other? Because I feel like we're in this kind of phony war at the moment, but where it goes next still feels very odd. Can you give us any insight as to the potential strategy here? Because I think a lot of people are waiting for this to actually either turn into something or just go away.
Yeah, you and I are sort of on the same page. I don't think it's going away. One of the things that Susie Wiles did say in the interview, by the way, was that the plan was to continue to bomb the drug boats until Maduro just said uncle. And I guess that means leave office. I think that's how it's being interpreted. I think now that Trump is in, he can't just leave. He has to do something. I don't know how he claims victory and pulls all the military out. I think it's being reported now as the largest naval armada in history in the Caribbean. You don't bring that kind of firepower down there and not use it. So something has to give. If it's really regime change, then they're going to have to stay down there until they get their regime change. But I have no idea what the administration is doing. The same circumstances that exist today existed when I was the chief of staff, and we never would have contemplated military action in Venezuela because Trump never would have wanted it. So if you're confused about this, don't feel bad, because a lot of people, including his former chief of staff, are as well.
Fair enough. And, personally, just sitting down here in Australia, I'd rather see some of those ships in the Pacific. But hey, I'm no Admiral Nimitz. Another story which caught my eye just before we went to air here, and just to go back to this whole question of what's going to happen next year, the Democrats now say that they are going to run candidates at every state and congressional seat in the state of Texas. Now, I think this is a very interesting strategy here, because it suggests to me that they feel A, confident, but B, that they are looking to do something where they force the Republicans to stretch their resources and tie up manpower and dollars across this entire huge state. Does this suggest that there's a confidence among the Democrats, despite the Democrats polling, as I mentioned at the start of the show, really appallingly and far worse than Donald Trump as a party?
Look, the Democrats have been looking at Texas now for 20 years as a prize they think they can get, and they don't get close. They've got a really, really weak candidate for the Senate race, a House member who is polling extraordinarily poorly. She's going to win the Democrat primary because she's a progressive leftist, but she's going to get waxed in the Senate race. So, look, it's the smart thing to do. If I'm running the Democrat Party, I'm going to try and get candidates in all the races. That's just the smart thing to do. Make people spend money, but just because you put a name on a ballot doesn't mean you're viable. So I'll worry about this more when I see the quality of the candidates, see some early polling. Do I think there'll be some tailwinds behind Democrat candidates in 2026 in the midterms? Yes, I do. In fact, if the election were today, the Republicans would lose control of the House, I think, almost for sure. But there's a long way between that set of circumstances and the Democrats being really, really viable in one of the reddest states in the nation.
Yeah, no, look, that's fair enough, Mick. Hey, also, just finally, before I let you go, really interesting story here that Ford is moving to basically axe electric vehicle production, shifting resources back to petrol, gasoline-powered cars. How much of this here is due to the Trump administration's policies around changing fuel standards and not forcing people into EVs? And does this suggest then that the U.S. auto market or making market is going to start to be able to once again fight back against all of those very heavily subsidized Chinese EVs, which we are seeing flooding America and, well, not America now, but also Australia?
Yeah, I think you're seeing the Trump team do what a good conservative Republican would want them to do, which is to get out of the business of manipulating the markets. If Americans want electric vehicles, American companies and foreign companies are going to make them. What we had was a giant perversion or distortion of the market over the course of the last 10 years, where the government essentially used tax policy to social engineer. They said, look, we know you don't really want an electric car, but here, we're going to make you buy them by changing the rules, so it makes it harder, more expensive to have petrol cars, gas-powered cars, and then give the subsidies for the EVs. Look, EVs make sense. I own one of them on an island that's only 3 miles long down in Florida. That makes sense there. If you live in Montana, they make 0 sense at all. So I'm glad to see the Trump administration getting back to some free market forces here. I wish they would do it in other places as well.
Yeah, I'd like to see Australia take a page out of that book when it comes to EVs versus petrol cars as well. But, you know, you live and learn. Anyway, Mick Mulvaney, thanks so much for joining me, and a very Merry Christmas to you and all the Mulvaneys.